Thanks so much for allowing me to contribute to your conference. In fact, I want to congratulate you to this conference and for looking at the role that global educational comparisons can play to support educational development so closely here. Latin America is no longer an isolated region of the world that can afford to marvel at its own belly bottom. In the last decade, economic growth and social development have lifted more than 50 million people out of poverty in the region. From 2000 to 2013, income per capita grew at over 2% each year. Social spending in the region also increased. Between 1995 and 2011, total spending on education as a share of GDP increased from 3.4 to 5.9% in Brazil, from 4.5 to 6.9% in Chile, and from 5.1 to 6.2% in Mexico. But more investment in education is only part of the answer. In fact, if money was all the answer, learning outcomes in Latin America would have improved as fast as spending on education. And that clearly hasn't happened except for a very few countries in the region. So it is great that you're looking at the questions of policy and practice in this conference. Of course, that's an area too where there are lots of things that have happened in the region. Countries like Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, and Uruguay, they've all introduced or at least significantly modified their national education laws since 2000. But again, laws and regulation can only be the beginning, not the end of educational change and reform. One of the things we have observed is that Latin American countries have all strengthened their educational assessment and evaluation capabilities, and that's really important. Many have introduced or developed national assessments, and more countries in the region are taking part in regional or international studies. For its third edition, 17 countries in the region participated in the assessment organized by UNESCO's Latin American Laboratory for Evaluation. And Latin America's participation in PISA has grown a lot too. Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, and Peru were sort of the pioneers in the region who began with PISA in 2000. And since then, many others have joined, including Colombia, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, and Uruguay, but also Panama and the region of Miranda in Venezuela, and most recently, Ecuador and Guatemala and Paraguay. And some of the results have actually been very encouraging. From PISA 2000 to 2012, mathematics performance in Latin America improved on average by 11 points. And that's a lot. In fact, it's roughly equivalent to the difference in average performance between Chile and Mexico, the two top performers in the region. The largest improvements were seen in Brazil, where 15-year-olds are now a full school year ahead of their peers a decade ago. So Latin America is catching up, but it still has a long way to go to reach the performance of the world's education leaders. And those keep moving too. The bottom line is really simple. In a global society, the benchmark for educational success is no longer improvement by national standards alone, but it's the world's most advanced education system. And more than 1 in 2 Latin American students that participated in PISA do not reach even the baseline level of performance in mathematics. And that implies, for example, not being able to use direct inference to extract relevant information from a single source, or to make use of it in a single representational mode. It means not being able to use basic mathematical concepts and operations to solve elementary problems. Just 1 in 2 students who took part in PISA 2012 can find the right answer to questions such as this in Chile. 1 in 3 can do so in Costa Rica, Mexico, and Uruguay. 1 in 4 can do so in Argentina and Brazil, and 1 in 5 can solve such basic problems in Colombia and Peru. Across OECD countries, only 1 in 5 students cannot solve this type of simple manipulations of whole numbers within a specific context. And beyond performance, the other key challenge for the region is equity and inclusion. Providing free access to quality schooling for all children remains a major challenge for countries in Latin America. In many countries in the region, private schools play an important role, but PISA shows that while many private schools deliver better results on average, once those schools are compared with public schools of similar social status, the performance advantage actually disappears, sometimes turns negative. School policies and practices matter a lot more to quality and equity in school than who runs the school or the amount of school resources or shiny buildings. In particular, talented and motivated school leaders and faculty are key for school success. Parental involvement is also proven to be a very important resource in many contexts. The final challenge for the region is to ensure that all students remain in the school system and complete compulsory education. Costa Rica, more than half of the 15-year-old population was not part of PISA 2012 because those kids were no longer in school. And in Colombia and Mexico, more than a third. In Brazil, Peru, and Uruguay, more than a quarter left out. But I want to stress that underperformance is not just an issue of poor kids from poor neighborhoods. It's an issue for many kids from many neighborhoods. In fact, the high share of students from advantaged backgrounds who do not reach even basic performance in some of the wealthiest neighborhoods of the region is worrying. The fact that the 10% socially most disadvantaged kids in Shanghai outperform the 10% children from the wealthiest families in large parts of Latin America, that reminds us that poverty isn't destiny, and it takes away excuses from those who are complacent. And it raises the question of what we can learn from the world's education leaders. The first lesson from PISA that I have learned is that leaders in high-performing school systems seem to have convinced their citizens to make choices that value education more than other things. Chinese parents and grandparents tend to spend their last money on the education of their children, their future. In much of Europe and the Americas, governments have started to borrow the money of their children to finance their own consumption today. We need to put that right. But placing a high value on education is just part of the equation. Another part is the belief in the success of every child. Top school systems expect every child to achieve, and they accept no excuse for failure. They realize that ordinary students have extraordinary talents, and they embrace diversity with differentiated instructional practices. And nowhere does the quality of a school system exceed the quality of its teachers. Top school systems pay close attention to how they select and train their staff. They attract the right talent, and they watch how they improve the performance of teachers who are struggling. And they provide intelligent pathways for teachers to grow in their careers. High performers have also moved on from industrial to professional forms of work organization in their school. They support their teachers to make innovations in pedagogy, to improve their own performance, but also that of their colleagues, and work together to frame good practice. And they grow and distribute leadership throughout the school system. The goal of the past was standardization and compliance. Top performers enable schools to be inventive. Policy can mandate adequacy, but you can only unleash greatness. And the most impressive outcome of world-class school systems is perhaps that they deliver high quality across the entire school system, so that every student benefits from excellent teaching. School systems as different as Finland and Shanghai attract the strongest principals to the toughest schools, and the most talented teachers to the most challenging classrooms. Contrast that with the large educational disparities that PISA shows for Latin America. I know that Latin America has embarked on deep educational reform, designed to tackle challenges such as those. Most countries in the region are reviewing their curricula, what they teach in schools. And that's really important. PISA shows that students in many Latin American countries are actually quite good in reproducing what they have learned in school. But PISA data also show that those students often struggle when they need to extrapolate from what they know and apply their knowledge in novel situations. And that's increasingly important. The modern world no longer rewards people just for what they know. Google knows everything, but for what they can do with what they know. And so we need to push the frontiers of PISA too. Of course, it's critical that students obtain a solid foundation and knowledge in key disciplines as measured by PISA. But it's equally important that they develop creative, critical thinking, and collaborative skills, and that they build character dimensions such as mindfulness, curiosity, courage, resilience, or leadership. And if we consider these dimensions important, we have to become better, indeed much better at measuring them. So PISA has a lot to learn too. And last but not least, effective policies are usually far easier designed than implemented. Latin America is far from alone with that challenge, and no one has any time to lose. The world has become quite indifferent to our tradition and past reputation. It's quite unforgiving to frailty or practice. Success is going to those individuals, institutions, and countries which are quick to adapt, slow to complain, and which are open to change. And the task for governments and for communities like yours is to help citizens rise to this challenge.